just to allow as many people in, as many as possible before we officially begin the event. And for those of you who would like a recording of this event and our other webinars as well, our other events on this platform, you can go to our YouTube channel and you will find this event after it's being recorded, and you will find our other events as well. So it is now 5 minutes past 7 p.m. South African time. So I'm going to officially welcome all of you and say good evening to all of you, and welcome to this event hosted by the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre in partnership with the Sylt or the Sylt Foundation. And welcome to this fourth part of this bi-monthly series by the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre and the Sylt Foundation, titled Voices of Belonging and Resistance. Tonight's event is titled Shifting Boundaries, and it is a conversation with Israeli writer Lizzie Doron about how writing can depict the trauma and pain that shaped her home country, her life, her family, and also in different generations, and how the past influences its future. And this conversation will also talk about how stories can liberate us and make us embrace each other beyond the visible front lines of identity subscriptions. Lizzie Doron was born in Israel and actually served in the Israeli Defense Force. Her mother was a German Holocaust survivor. She currently lives in Tel Aviv, and Doron formerly worked as a linguist at the University of Tel Aviv. In the fall term of 2019, she was the 12th, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Friedrich Dürrenmatt guest professor for world literature at the University of Bern. And in 2003, Doron won the Buchmann Prize, awarded by Yad Vashem Memorial, for her second book. And in 2007, she was awarded the Jeanette Schocken Prize. And she often writes about her family history, personal experiences, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Her latest book, What If, was published in German in August this year and connects Holocaust commemoration and the current political situation in Israel. Doron has also written about her changing views of the country. So it is now my pleasure and my privilege to welcome Lizzie Doron. Lizzie, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Shalom and Erev Tov, it's in Hebrew. I'm very happy to be with you this evening and to take part in the event. For the moment, I'm in Tel Aviv, in the room that I usually spend my days writing other stories. And as I told before, just to give you a picture of life of second generation writer. So beyond me, if you can see, I have a fridge with food just in case. And in front of me, beyond the wall, which is just 1 second, just one step, I have a shelter in case of an attack or a war or a siren. So I am the commander of the family. I am the first one to be in the shelter and to call everybody to follow me. But on peaceful days and in my everyday life, I usually work from early morning. This is just one place that is the place that I sit, think, and write, but I share my life in 2 cities. The family lives in Tel Aviv and in Berlin. So it's interesting because it's a kind of vicious circle in my life that I go back to the parents' homeland and I sit in my homeland and they both become my homeland.
Mm. Wow, thank you for that introduction. And
it just came out.
Yes, and before we began the webinar, we did chat a little bit, and you were telling us about the interesting how you are in 2 cities, but a lot of people who are joining us this evening are aware of your work. Some people have even read your books. But for the benefit of some people, some segments of our audience who are not perhaps very aware of your work and your name and your books, can you tell us how many books have you written? And can you unpack your history and your connection to the Holocaust?
Listen, the fact that I'm a writer, it's in a way an accident. I wanted, as you mentioned, to be a professor in linguistics in Tel Aviv University. And I was around 40, I think. I was working on my PhD, and I was totally on a track of being a professor. I never dealt with my history, and my biography was a kind of a Pandora box, which I had no motivation to open. I grew up as an only child with a mother who was a Holocaust survivor. My father passed away. He was an Holocaust and a survivor as well, but I was young and I don't remember him in my life. It's another complicated story, but I'll try to tell my story in a nutshell. I tried to ask my mother questions, but she said that she is responsible for the past and I'm responsible for the future, and she refused to give me any details about her past. She even erased the tattoo number of Auschwitz from her hand. She had there a scar, and she never used to share with me any of her experiences. And now I'll jump to the day that I can talk about this day as an accident. When my daughter came back from school, she was 14, and we in Israel have a project that children has to bring to school the history of the family in narrative and pictures, albums, whatever, for a collection of the Jewish history. And she came back home and she said, Mother, I need for Wood's project, this is the name of the project, your biography. And I said, it will be very easy. You can write Holocaust. That's all I know. And I have nothing to deliver. No pictures, no documents, no stories, nothing. And she cried. She really was shocked to see her mom knowing nothing about her own history. And then I think that as a mother, I decided to be different and not to follow my mother's silence. I said to her, listen, because I know nothing, the only thing I can do is to retrieve memories. And I asked for a break from the university, and for 3 months, I just retrieve memories. I was shocked that I have so many memories and so many questions, and that I really remember what I heard when I was 3 or 4 years. It was a surprise for me that from the moment I opened the Pandora box, it was packed and full, and I couldn't stop writing. But after 3 months, my daughter needed the materials for the project, and I gave her the project for school, and I plan to go back to the university. It just happened that my assistant came from the university to ask why I'm not in the university and why I took this vacation in a way. And I told her, listen, I had to help my daughter in the Roots project. And she asked me to read, because she said, you know, everybody talk about the fact that we know nothing about your past. And I said, you can know whatever I know. And she read the text that I wrote to my daughter, and she said, it's a masterpiece. And I said, thank you, so what? And she said, it should be a book. And I said, excuse me? And she said, no, it should be a book. It's a personal story, forget about it. And she had a poker face. But 44 days after this meeting, I got a lot of phone calls from publishers in Israel. And they asked me if I'm Lizzie Doron because they want to publish my story. And I said, how come? what's going on? And then she called me and she said, I couldn't stand the situation, and without permission, I just send your text to all publishers I know in Israel.
Wow.
At the beginning, I refused. It was a personal story. But then I had a lot of pressure from friends, from my family that supported me, and from my daughter as well, that this story should be published. And I said, okay, it will be published, but leave me alone. I'm not a writer, I'll go back to the university. And the book was published. And it's, why did you care before the war? It's the question I asked my mother. And 3 months after it was published, many publishers from all the world knocked on my door asking me to translate the book. I was shocked. It was like intrusion in my privacy, and I never dreamt to be a writer. I never thought I have these tools or talent to write. And again, I refused. It's not just I refused, I was so ashamed to expose my personal story and my feelings towards my mom that for 1.5 years, I couldn't enter any bookstore. A journalist was looking for me for interview, and I refused. It's a very interesting story because at the end, the one who convinced me to continue writing came from Germany. And she was a scouter of one of the biggest publishers in Germany. And they asked me to come to Germany. And again, something pushed me to go to Germany. And we were sitting there in the room. I was invited by the publisher. And I couldn't believe that I am a writer. It was not in my identity. It was just my personal story. And the man then looked at me and he said, Lizzie, you should be honest with us. Is it just one book, or you have more stories to tell? Your stories are very important. And I want to get an answer immediately. It was a German style. He was very tough, very cool. And I, with my energy and neurotic syndrome, just looked at him, and I got for a moment a kind of a rage that probably belonged to my history. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? I will continue writing books. And he said, books? How many? And I said, 6. And then he asked me, why 6? And I said to him, for each million, 1. We were all shocked. And he said, okay, it's my chance. Sign the contract. And I signed. And when I left this publishing house, I said, Lizzie, you're crazy. You are not a writer. How could you sign a contract of continue writing? But this was the day that changed my life and the beginning of my career as a writer. And as more than a writer, as a storyteller of whole generation, of second generation, and the Israeli story. Wow, what a long answer.
Yes, well, oh, but thank you for that. Thank you for those details and for those intricacies. Thank you. But you said something very interesting that I've been thinking about as you've been speaking. You said you retrieved memories. What do you mean you retrieved the memories, and how did you retrieve those memories?
That's a wonderful question. I love this question. I was not aware that I keep a storage of memory. I was like a Google Drive. As a child, because nobody was talking to me or telling me story, and I lived in a neighborhood that all the people were Holocaust survivors. We were around 100 families. Most of the children were born in Israel, my age, from the 50s and up. And most of the people were Holocaust survivors who were talking all those East European languages like Romanian, Polish, Hungarian, Russian. German was not allowed to be the language that people can speak in the streets of Israel at that time, because it was the language of the trauma. But anyhow, my mother talked German with herself at home, so I just got a bit of this sense of this language. But I was a very curious child, or a child that, because nobody told her anything, so I went to the houses of the neighbors to listen. Just I came to ask for something, a book, or to eat something, because it was an open neighborhood. We can go in and out everywhere there. And even at night, that was also very interesting, because I heard the door, the key of the door, and I knew that my mother is on her way to the street. There, the people were gathering during the night and sharing stories about what happened to them there, which means in the Holocaust. I just stood beyond the curtain at the window and I listened to the stories. I never shared with anyone the stories that I heard, and I was not sure that I really understand, because the stories were told in many, many languages. And I spoke mainly Hebrew because I insist of being Israeli, and I refuse to be a daughter of Holocaust survivor. I want to be, if I may say, a pure Israeli, and to leave behind the history of the diaspora. And I never used this information in a way. I never thought about. I had a wonderful denial mechanism. I'm a specialist in denial mechanism, how to work with this mechanism. And when my daughter touched probably the key of this denial mechanism, I was flooded. It's not a nice word, but it's the real description, if to be honest. I vomit my memories. It was so easy for me to write my stories, comparing to my effort to write my PhD, which I really worked and I sweat. But at the moment you ask me to tell memories,
yes,
it's like I'm a machine. I can write endlessly.
Can you remember which memory is the most vivid or the most prominent memory that keeps reoccurring? What is that memory that keeps reoccurring?
It will be so stupid that I'm almost ashamed to share with you. But when I start writing the book, I was not sure that my memories are not fake. And the only thing that I knew, because nobody is there anymore, I have to create my truth from inside. The only thing that I remember that in my childhood home, sorry, it's my daughter, but the only thing that I really remember was that we had 19 stairs in my apartment. In order to come from the yard to the door of the house, there are 19 stairs. And why 19? Because whenever my mother came in or out, I was afraid that she will fall down or she will do something strange, because she was a kind of in between normality and post-traumatic and paranoid and all those symptoms, which I was afraid that she will fall down, basically. And whenever she climbed the stairs or she went out of home, I remember that I was counting stairs number 1, stairs number 2, stairs number 3, and I had in my mind the number 19. And when I start writing, I wanted to hold something concrete. So after a few sentences, I stopped writing. I took my car. It's 20 minutes from the place I live now to my childhood home. I went, parked near my home, stood outside, and I start counting the stairs. And when I realized that there are really 19 stairs, it was like to get a certificate that I'm talking and telling the truth. And that gave me a lot of power, or even feeling of doing the right thing, because I felt that it's a testimony. It's not something that came out of my imagination, that I didn't create a virtual world. And from the moment I entered the car back home, I knew that I will write my story, and I have the guts to open the Pandora box. And the stairs are always in my mind as a visual and concrete picture that helps me to be sure that what I'm telling you is at least my truth.
Wow, that's so powerful. How that memory, that image is your guiding line as you retrieve these memories. That's incredible. This might be emotional.
I want to say, can I?
Oh yes, yes.
You know, it's very interesting. I thought a lot about this. I am a person of words, but I got my legitimation from numbers, because 19 was the number that helped me to create stories, 19 stairs. So I start writing that I had a concept that the concept that make my stories real was a concept of number.
Well, Lizzie, this might be, of course, emotional, but could you just tell us briefly about your mother's suffering and history during the Holocaust?
I don't know.
Oh.
No, because I got later, after publishing my books, I got a lot of information. For example, I got documents that she was in Auschwitz. I got also documents she was in a death march, that she was also in another horrible camp, Skarżecki Kamiena. But no one could assure me that all those documents, maybe there were people with the same number. My mother had a psychological need that I will be sure that she was born just on the day that I was born. So she never ever told me how old she was, when was her birthday. For example, I asked Mom, why we don't celebrate your birthday? And she said, because I was born again on the day that you came to the world, and you are my birthday as well. And for example, she had a scar in the end, which after erasing the Auschwitz tattoo. And I was not stupid, and I was a very nagging child, and I said, what is this? What is this? And she said, you see, it's a scar. So I don't have any coherent story of my mom history. I have rumors, I have information I got from neighbors. I have one of the most, I think, incredible information was from a neighbor that was younger than my mom, 10 or even 12 years. And one day I was 8 years old. I went to the grocery shop to buy vegetables and fruit. And while I was choosing cucumbers, tomatoes, and oranges, she whispered in my ear, you know, your mother saved me in the selection in Auschwitz. I had no clue what Auschwitz was. I was 8 or 9. And then she opened her Pandora box and she told me the whole story that my mother came with the plush of deportation to the gates of Auschwitz, but someone gave her a small bottle with bleach and she poured the bleach on her head. She became immediately blonde. And this lady that told me the story said, and I was the little child in this transport, and I looked at her and she pushed me out of the line and she poured the bleach on my head. It burned my head. And then when we stood near the German officer in the selection, your mother said, listen, my name is Elena Hordo. I am German. This is my sister, and it's a mistake that we were taken with the Jewish people. And all the transport was sent to the gas chamber, and they too were the only survivors of this transport. Think about a child that continue collecting the cucumbers and the onions and the potatoes, listening to the story, which is unclear. She cannot understand what it means. And at the same minute, somebody else came to the shop, to the grocery shop, and said, you are again talking about her mother, but you should know that your aunt was a dentist and she was a collaborator with Mendele, and she took out the gold teeth of the Jews, and that's the reason they both were saved. And those were stories that I heard as a child with no, I got them as not stories, but crazy people talk about something I cannot really understand. And I couldn't use those stories because they were an enigma for me. While I understood about Auschwitz, and I was 12 or even later 14 when we start talking at school about Holocaust. And I got all those stories, but it was a chaos in my mind and probably in my heart as well. So I couldn't build up a narrative. It took almost 30 years later when my daughter asked me questions that I could contain all those pieces of stories that I collected either by my curiosity or by listening to the other, and then starting to make them to a kind of an understandable story, at least for me.
Well, Lizzie, you've touched on something that I would like us to go deeper into, and that is intergenerational trauma. This concept of intergenerational trauma, can you briefly unpack this term to us? What is intergenerational trauma? And also in terms of how can you reflect on this as related to the Holocaust? And also your book, Why Did You Not Come Before the War, was made into a play and is quoted in research and other literature about intergenerational transmission of Holocaust memory. Can you unpack all of this for us?
Yes, I think that, not from a perspective of psychological terms, I must say, but, as a storyteller, and even as a person, and even as a mother, and as a daughter. So I can tell you that from the early age, I felt that I want to find another family, an alternative family. I had no clue why, but I want to replace my mom. And that was really interesting. I had an image of totally a different mom. I wanted her to be from a kibbutz. I wanted her to be from Israel. I wanted her to be a person with no stories of something awful that happened there. And I also wanted brothers and sisters and fathers. So just also think about being just stuck with one person, a post-traumatic person, are very clever, very smart, but living in a house of silence. So I developed a very deep rage against my destiny. And then I think that the turning point was really later in my life when I became a mother. And I tried to understand how difficult was it to raise your daughter just by yourself. And then I had much more empathy, and I looked at her as a human being, not as a mother which I want to get rid of her. And I think that I found that we are very similar. For example, we have the same need to keep food just in case of emergency. We had a very much similar symptoms like migraines. We prefer to stay at home and not to go far. We will never went to trek, or we were not travelers in a way. And we need just a small circle of people that we can trust. And I felt that the only person which I look at him and is my mirroring became my mom. And years later, when my daughter and son grew up, in a way, everybody has more than one refrigerator at home. Everybody is looking for a place to have a better and safe life. And that is very interesting. My son, the Israeli women are not really fighters in the front line, but my son, who had to be in the army and had to be a combat fighter, couldn't be a soldier. The fears of being a soldier, holding guns, fighting, brought him to leave Israel. And my son is now in Germany. And it's really interesting to see, first of all, our deep and strange relation with Germany, because we are going to Israel, but we are attracted by Germany as well. And I must say that as a writer, when I promote my stories, and I also decided to touch the story of my neighbors that lives under occupation, the Palestinian side, I found myself rejected by the Israeli society and welcomed by the German. So if you talk with me about trauma, trauma is not just the emotional and psychological feeling, it's also the identity and the things that you take as priority. I feel that I have to fight for people who are in need, to give helping hand to someone who needs help, like the Palestinian in my case for the moment. And also, I belong not just to Israel, I belong deeper also to the family roots who came from East Europe. So I think that we are still live in a kind of a broken identity. I'm not fully Israeli, I'm not fully German, I'm not fully writer, I'm much more building my history and try to follow my values, which were the values of my mom. And here to close this topic, I want to tell you something. The only thing that my mother asked from me was, listen, I was saved by a German officer, and there is no Holocaust survivor who didn't get a helping hand. The only thing that I want you to do in your life, give an helping hand to someone you find that is in a need for getting help. And if you take the whole story and put it just in the core or in a nutshell, whatever I do, whatever I think, and my topics in my books are the story of an ongoing syndrome from one generation to the second generation. And by the way, my daughter is a medical doctor. That was the dream of my mom. She started to study medicine in Poland before the war. Then she became a nurse after the war because she couldn't re-continue the studies. And my daughter, even without knowing, from early child, she said, I will be a doctor, I will save the life of the people. And my son is a puppeteer. And because we grew up in a very sad atmosphere, he wanted to be the funny guy.
Oh, he's a puppeteer.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Object theater with puppets. And he's very funny. He's the one who took the manic side in the family. My daughter, the depressive side, and I'm in between, try to find my balance.
Yes, thank you for that. But again, you've mentioned something that I would like us to unpack a little bit. So in 2015, you met a Palestinian filmmaker. And in your subsequent book, I'm not sure if I should pronounce the title, but Who the F is Kafka?
Who the fuck is Kafka? This is the F. The F is the fuck. By the way, I must tell you something because words. The book was also translated into Italian language. And in Italy, you cannot write on any title fuck. And then they changed totally the name of the book, Cinecittà. And one day some journalist called me and said, I want to have an interview about Cinecittà. And I said, what should I do with Cinecittà? And he said, it's a book you published. And I said, which book? And he said, I don't know, this is the title in Italian language.
Oh, wow.
But the Germans were the only one who said, what's the name of the book? Who the fuck is Kafka? Wunderbar. Let's go with this title.
Oh, that's hilarious. Thank you for that. But in the book, you investigate whether friendship between an Israeli and a Palestinian is possible. Can you explore your move from Holocaust-related writing to looking and writing about the conflict? And how does it connect to you as Lizzie Doron, the writer, before these books?
Listen, I think that it's a continuity. You cannot just talk about yourself and what happened to you and to deal just with your pains. At the moment, I understood that the pain was caused by politicians, by hatred, by racism, by humiliating the other. I felt that I did a lot to tell our story, the Jewish story, but it's not enough. In order to really deal with these topics, with all those topics deeply, you have to be responsible and also honest with yourself and to say, how can I be better or take responsibility for not taking part in what I can say, basically it's racism or the feeling that you are better than somebody else. And I was lucky enough to meet in a peace conference in Italy, a nice guy from East Jerusalem who is a journalist and was ready to cooperate and to tell me about his life under our occupation. And I went to his home for 3 years on 2 days on a weekly basis. And I could see from his window the Israeli soldiers. And I could, inside his house, to live the life of a Palestinian who has no freedom, who has no feeling of having a land or an option to vote for how they want their life to be. And this was for me a very important lesson because, you know, I was so deep in my own story And while you are deep in your story, you don't see the other. And that was for me a kind of a thing, because if I tell my story and I want to have the mercy and the empathy of the other, I should have it as well. And this project attracted me. And I think that I really devoted myself almost for 5 years to telling the stories of my enemies. By the way, it's really interesting because I'm dealing with enemies in general, because in a way, Germans are my enemies as well. So I try to understand enemies. I try to understand why a person is ready to kill somebody else. Why it's very easy to humiliate or to fight against somebody whom you don't know personally. So I learned to know quite well the Germans and to understand that human beings should talk and meet each other, otherwise they develop monsters in their mind. Without knowing the other, you are free to develop hatred and discrimination and excluding the others. So it was like a kind of a seesaw which gave me the balance. I had to meet my own enemies and to be, it's not brave, but to be honest enough to get to know them. And it was a huge surprise because my enemy became my best friend. And I dedicated the book to his family and to the people under the occupation. And I wrote the book, which I loved so much. I thought it's so important. But then I was really surprised that no one in Israel wanted to publish this book, because for the Israeli publishers and for the Israeli society, I have to follow the Jewish narration. And as they told me, Holocaust is selling well, but you are Jewish and you are second generation. So in a way, you are doomed to continue telling the Jewish story. Let the Palestinian tell their own stories. And I try to explain that the Palestinians, because they are under occupation, they don't have any publishers and they don't have the guts and they're afraid to tell their stories. So I should be their voice. And from that moment, I couldn't publish any books in Israel. So for your question, which I didn't answer in the beginning, I wrote 9 books. 5 are in Hebrewish as well, and 4 others are just in German and other languages, but I'm not anymore an Israeli writer. I'm in a way an Israeli writer in exile because I write in Hebrew and my books are published in German language, which I don't know to read. So I'm just a writer, but not a reader anymore of my own books.
That's interesting. That's very complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. My story is complicated.
Yes. But your latest book, What If, was published in German, and it was published this year, and it connects, in a way, it connects Holocaust commemoration and the current political situation in Israel. And I'll tell people a little bit about the book, and then I'll ask you to talk about it. So the narrator visits a dying friend in a hospice and connects her family story, her upbringing, her belonging to Israel in memory flashbacks, while she tried to remember how her connection with Yigal, the friend, was. A friend who was taken hostage in war and since then became an advocate for peace. It is such an important book, Lizzie, and how different layers of trauma have been affecting Israeli society. Can you unpack this latest book for us?
Listen, this book, it's interesting. The writer has totally different motivation and needs to tell the story, and the readers can take the book to their own world. The book for me is a story of guilt feeling, because Yigal was a true friend of mine, and I loved him like I was loved in Israel, while we were in the consensus, while we loved Israel, while we loved to go to war and to save our nation, while we believe that Israel is the best solution for Jewish people. And it shouldn't be just an Israeli story, but when you have a belief and you have a group of people and your belief and your values are in the consensus, you have, in a way, a very easy life. And we all, what we want, just to go to work, to earn money, to have family, those really simple things. And Yigal wanted to be a typical Israeli, and he was really a combat fighter in a war. And then he was put in the Syrian jail after the 73 war, and he came out with a huge post-trauma. And he wanted that we all will know that wars are horrible and we have to find a solution. And I'm talking, he came back and he started his voyage to change the Israeli society in 1975. And he was, in a way, a post-traumatic with very aggressive behavior. And he wanted us, his friend, to understand that Israel is misleading us. And I remember the day that we still had those letters that we got in a post box. I could find 100 letters that he read: stop war, let's find solution for peace. Later on, when we had fax, so I couldn't work with my fax at home because it was flooded with Yigal's letters, and in a way it was something that probably called for help, but he wanted us, all his friends from childhood, all of us are second generation, all of us believed in a new state of Israel and that we are on the right track and we have to defeat the enemies and we are strong and we'll overcome all wars. And he was like a prophet, at the very beginning, after his experience, he wanted to change the agenda of Israel. He wanted the two-state solution because even the Palestinians thought about the two-state solution. And he was really dedicated for that. And he was really a person which cannot hold himself. And for years, he found that I am probably the best potential to be his partner. I believe that because he knew well my mother that was against war and she didn't believe that Israel is on the right track. And she told me that whenever she sees a soldier, she knows that soldiers is trained to kill. And she didn't appreciate so much the Israeli IDF, the Israeli army. And she always said, we should be dedicated to human beings and not to land and a nation or religion. And I felt that Yigal discovered the soul of my mom before I discovered the soul of my mom. But I rejected him. Not to say that when we were children, we were a kind of lovers. And when I was, I think, 25 and 13, and he tried to build up with me a kind of relation that will be a power couple that will fight for peace, I just rejected him. And it happened to be that I was in a meeting with a good friend of ours that he told me that he got a very strange phone call from a friend of him that is in a hospice. It was not my story, it was a story of somebody else. And he said that they were childhood friends and then they hadn't met each other for 40 years, but he got a phone call from the hospice, and this childhood friend told him, listen, I'm very sick. It's my last days. And I want you to be the last one that I'll see before I leave this world. My friend was shocked, but he went to the hospital, but he came late. And he had no clue why he asked him to be the last person in the world he wanted to see. He told me the story. And he said it's very sad, but we continue talking about different issues. I came home. I couldn't sleep at night. In the morning, I told my husband, listen, I know that I have a new book. I know the first sentence, I know the last sentence, I know that it will be approximately 120 pages, but I don't want to write it. I feel that it will broke me. But I couldn't resist. And for 7 days, this book was written in 7 days. And when I wrote, I felt this is a story of a guilt feeling that I had inside me because I didn't listen, because I didn't give him any helping hand, because I let him to die alone, which is true, by the way, not in a hospice, but no one knows what really happened to him. All his friends left him. For a while, he left Israel. I think that he lived in Germany for a few years. And there are rumors that he was there married and he got a son, but they kicked him out because he was really crazy. He wanted to change the whole world, to stop with all the industry of animations. And he was really totally devoted to one issue: stop the war, stop the hatred, stop racism. And he was at the end lost, and we let him to be lost. And this is for me a very important book because it's very personal. Even though I understand that many readers sees this book as a more Israeli soul-searching story, but it's a personal soul-searching story.
Thank you for that, for unpacking a little bit that book. It is in German. So I don't know if there's an English translation. I don't think so. No. Yes.
I had problems with the BDS on another side because I'm Israeli. So it's very difficult for Israeli writers that write in Hebrew to get, for the moment, English publishing house, because the pressure of the BDS. Many English readers don't buy English books written originally in Hebrew by Israeli writers. So in Israel, I'm not published because I'm leftist and I'm a traitor in a way, and I'm not focusing on the Israeli story. And there are countries in which I cannot publish my book because I'm Israeli and I'm under the siege of the BDS. I hope you know what is the BDS. It's the boycott against Israel because of the occupation.
Yes. All right. But I would like, you've mentioned Germany a few times, and you even mentioned Germany as an enemy. However, you live both in Israel and in Berlin. And in Germany, you are an acclaimed author and your books are translated and you do many readings there. How do you feel about this as a second generation descendant of a Holocaust survivor? What does Germany mean to you now, today?
Listen, it's amazing that you said that I said that the Germans are enemy. First of all, I'm very good in developing relationship with enemies, as you see. My enemies, if you come to my home around the table, there will be Palestinians and German, which means that we are sitting most of the time is with enemies. Maybe I have this gift to transform relationship and to be very close and in intimate relationship with enemies, because I think that it's challenging and it's more interesting to build up a new relationship and to break all the stigma and all those previous beliefs and fears. And I must say something about Germany that I found at the soul searching. that the world did after the Second World War. It was done in a deep way in Germany. And I feel that we understand each other because trauma is trauma by the perpetrators and by the victims. And many times the victim became also a perpetrator. It's a vicious circle. And I feel that with building bridges in Germany, I tried to cut or to break those stereotype line, because most of my friends in Germany are second generation as well because of age and etc. And they did their atonement in a way that they wanted to listen to my story. And I think that it's important that I listen to their story, because without having the potential, the mental potential to listen to the stories of others, you can't solve anything. And even if it's the story of the perpetrator, you have to go forward with having the full story of the history of the past, and even the personal story with all difficulties. And I find that what makes me being able to live in Germany is, first of all, the open, intimate, and honest relationship and sharing the heart stories. This is the thing you should do, not to cover, not to ignore, to share the really deep feeling and stories. And that's what makes friendship a friendship. But to say something else, which is very important for me, that basically, you know, in Israel, you can generalize and say, we hate the Arab, we hate the German. Lucky me, I grew up with a mother that the only thing that she wanted me to know, that everything depends on people. And in spite all, she was saved by a German officer. And she said that every story depends on the people you meet. And it was very difficult at that time to tell, even for my mother wanted to tell that she was saved by a German officer. By the way, she went to Germany to give a testimony and to try to save his life. He was doomed to be killed, and he got a life sentence prison because of the testimony of my mom that he saved her. So the story of life are much more complicated than saying the Germans are bad, the Jews are good, the Arabs are good, the Jews are bad. It's come down so many layers and so many levels. And the only thing to try to discover what is hidden between the layers is to touch the layers, to feel them, which means to talk, to be open, to be brave in a way, to listen to the story of your enemy. And by the way, and this is the motivation for my writing, for the need to spread my stories. It's not really a personal agenda. It's an agenda which I feel that meeting your enemy makes your life better.
It requires that way of thinking, though. It does require a lot of introspection and a lot of self-work in order to arrive at that way of thinking. It's not easy. It's not easy for many people here in South Africa. 27 years after apartheid, it's not easy. It's easier said than done.
Yes, but you know what easy, what can make it easier a bit, at least from my experience, I think that while you are not devoted to values like nationalities, religion, gender, what we are trying to do for the moment is to melt, for example, the boundaries. You talked about boundaries at the beginning, the boundaries even of gender, not to say who is more masculine, who is more feminine. Now we are trying to build up a gray zone. And you know, while you belong to a country, to a religion, to a certain nationality, then you excluded the other, being in a church, not being in a synagogue, or not being in a mosque. And what I think that at the moment you are free, and you see yourself just by chance, I was born Black, I was born in South Africa, I shouldn't be devoted to my tribe or to my piece of land or my nation. I should be devoted to the human species. And then I should be much more curious to meet the other, to meet the color person or the Chinese. And that is I think the startup, I'm from the startup nation, of having a huge change in your inner feelings. And you know what made me open is that in a way I was kicked up from Israel, my country. I'm not a writer here. And I built up a new concept of country. My country is Tel Aviv and Berlin. Those are two cities in which I feel free to live and in which I have friends. And I don't have an ID from Tel Aviv, Berlin. I don't have a passport, Tel Aviv, Berlin. But in my brain and my heart, those are two places in the entire world which I'm happy to live, and I have the friends. So the concept of belonging is totally different right now in my identity.
Wow, thank you for that, for unpacking that, and for giving us an idea, a way of thinking that might be helpful through our own struggles. Lizzie, we do have a very small audience, so I would like to invite people, members of the audience, to pose questions. And I see there are already 2 questions in the chat. And because we are such a small gathering, I'm going to ask the people who've written the questions on the chat to unmute themselves and then to ask you the question verbally. I think it would be much better to do it that way.
Nice idea, I like it.
Yes. So I'll start from the very top. So our very first question was from Linda Heckner. So I'm going to ask Linda to unmute herself and please ask her question.
Shalom, Lizzie.
Shalom.
Na'im ma'od. Lizzie, you said that when you get to know people, then they are your enemies. Then they are no longer monsters, and like you getting to know the Palestinians and getting to know the Germans. But then that begs the question of how come Germans who knew Jewish Germans well, they were their neighbors, they were their friends, Polish people who had Jewish neighbors, Lithuanian people, how come they could then turn them into monsters and kill them? So to what extent is it really a question of, I don't know, okay, one by one you can do it, but what happens when it extends to the herd, I suppose?
I think that you have the answer in your question. It's a wonderful question, because this is the question I ask myself. I'm not sure I have an answer. Yeah. Because I think that one by one, if you will be the majority, that is the momentum of really changing. But you know, you are feeding by others. For example, the story about the Jews that are just in the business of money, building a monster stereotype. Even though it's your neighbor, it doesn't mean you know him. It means you know him physically. It means you know him, but you can think that he's a different creature. You know, here in Israel, we have Ethiopian people, referring to South Africa. They are Black Jewish, and people at the beginning couldn't see them as Jewish because they had in their own mind that Jewish should be white. And whenever there was a fight in the street, the first one to be taken by the police was the black guy. And this is, it's something that you have to have your own struggle to be able to say, how come he is a human being like me? And this should be at the beginning, I think, like a movement that will be taken by people who feel that they can, first of all, make on a personal basis the change. Listen, for example, meeting the Palestinian guys, I couldn't convince any of my friends that he is a human being. They told me he's a Muslim. In a moment he will have a hand grenade and he will kill you. And then I said, okay, maybe they're right. I invited him to a dinner in my home with Israeli friends. And that was a slow and not a deep, but that was the first step for a kind of changing attitudes. But this is the challenge, like a climate change, how you do the climate change, slowly, step by step, and everyone should be responsible. It's not our prime minister, it's not our president, it's not our neighbor, it's not our nation. It's we, the people. I cannot join right now any war against the Arabs because I have now so many friends and they have now so many, all of them are peace activists. So we are still the minority, but I don't have, if you have any other way, let me know, send me a fax or an email or a WhatsApp, I'll join your group. But the only thing I know that changed me, and by the way, I had less rage and hatred. I hardly hate somebody. I can ignore, I can be critic, but at the beginning, as a child, I have a lot of rage and hatred towards the Germans, towards the Arabs. Everybody wants to kill me. Now I think that it's interest, it's into interest, and it's the needs of politicians. And even it's something we had in the history. We, the Jewish people, were chosen by God, and he told us that we are the best. Okay, I have doubt. So and that should be probably the way to embrace people in the world, no matter what color. What thinks about the gays community, how it could change, because they did a wonderful job for themselves. They had a lot. They have a lot to do, but this is one of the maybe most optimistic way of changing attitudes.
Thank you for that question,
and thank
Linda.
you for the question. Hi, my dear.
Thank you. And now I'm going to ask Tali Nate to ask.
Sure.
Yes, please.
Hi. Really amazing hour, and thank you for allowing us to engage with your thinking and your past. And for those that are listening, I said to Lizzie before, when I grew up in Israel, and I'm also a second generation, and your book that came out, it's now probably, 24 years ago, 23 years ago, maybe more.
1995.
Yeah, so yeah, we are getting to 26
I'm
years.
I'm old. But still
so influential. It was so influential on me, on that period where when it came back, when it came out, to really look at that intergenerational and memories and all those issues that you touch. But my question is really now about Germany, because yes, Berlin is different than Germany in many ways, but living in Berlin, yes, I admire the way the Holocaust, this introspection, this way of looking at the past, of working with the past around the Holocaust. But they are struggling to look at other pasts, German pasts. And gave the example when I wrote my question, for example, colonial past. Yes, now there's admission that Herero and Nama was a genocide. There will be some payment, but there is a struggle in Berlin. Still some S-Bahn or U-Bahn stations are sort of a little bit colonial images. In the Murrstrasse, I'm thinking about, I mean, it's not a good name and so on. There is a struggle to deal with other pasts that are difficult German pasts. And I identify with it because I think South Africans, we also struggle to look at all our pasts. You know, there are certain pasts that are easier to look at. And Israel as well, easier to look at certain pasts, but very difficult and don't touch other pasts. So I'm just would like you to reflect specifically about Germany, about living in Germany and witnessing the struggle. And what do you think about it? Are you engaging with other voices, colonial voices, African voices, Namibian voices, to hear about those struggles? Did you have the opportunity?
Well, listen, I'm in a way a tourist there. I'm not really an integral part. And as a guest, I see more and I feel more, but I'm there to remind them, and that's important. It's not that I can't change because this is their land and their history and story, but my presence is, in a way, I'm a kind of an installation, you know, or a memorial living statue, if I may say, because I'm there. And I think that it was important to be there on time of building a new identity, of struggling, of, I think that I am afraid of being in homogenic place, and being heterogenic everywhere is an option to open the boundaries. And I'm not involved, but if I have a reading, I can see in my reading refugees from Africa. My readings in Germany, at least they know the language, is multiculti. And having saying that, not being there, it's less good than being there, in spite of all your wonderful question, which I'm, as not a German, cannot give you an answer. But I think that my presence there interrupt. And if I be many, that is the issue of making changes. And having said that, I want to say something else. It's not just a statement that I live in Berlin. It's also a statement that I live in Tel Aviv, because for me, living in Jerusalem, it's not even a possible. It's Jerusalem. It's not the city which I can identify with. It's city of hatred. It's city that believes in God and not in people, in past and not in the present or in the future. And it's a place that the main discussion there, it's the discussion of belief and history. And for example, my presence in Jerusalem cannot help, because I have no one to talk with. When I'm in Jerusalem with my Palestinian friends, they usually throw stones on my car, or running, chasing and cursing me. So in these places, as an individual, I can make a change. So I also have to be in places in which my presence matters. And in Berlin, I feel, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm naive, but you know, between us, I believe that my presence in Berlin really matters, because I'm there in newspaper and TV, in schools, in universities, in the parliament. So I'm there very active. So they at least hear my voice. That's the minimum I can do. And I'm sorry that in Tel Aviv, nobody can hear my voice because I'm not relevant anymore, but at least there are people that when they see me, maybe they think, why they kick her out? So maybe I arouse a kind of a guilt feeling, or doubts or questions. So I I believe that it's better to be in a place that your presence matters. Is it an answer?
Yeah, no, a beautiful answer. I'm just almost want to challenge you to not give up on being relevant in Tel Aviv, because I think the questions are important. The presence and the, how did you call it? The interrupter is important. It doesn't matter if you don't touch anyone, you know, it just, and I'm not saying if you're right, wrong, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. I don't know if I'm right or wrong.
No,
really.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I arouse
your voice
questions.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So continue. Don't don't abandon. Don't abandon the interruption, whatever it's called. Yes.
Thank you, Tali, for that question. Thank you. And thank you, Lizzie, for that response. My final question to you, Lizzie, before we close, if there are no more, if maybe there's someone else, one last person in the audience who would like to pose their questions or have a comment, if there's no one else, my final question to you, Lizzie, is what do you wish for the future? What is your wish for the future? And also, what other projects are you working on that you can tell us about?
Okay, that's an easier answer, because I don't know what to wish to the future. The future is so unstable and uncertain during the corona, the climate change, even personally in Israel, and the whole world in a way is shaking, and we are in a kind of a restart of the universe in a way, more or less, but I don't know what to wish. I can just wish personally health to all of us. But I work on the next project, and I thought a lot, mainly when we think about post-trauma. In Israel, it's very clear that post-trauma of wars belong to the men, to the soldiers, the masculine side of the map. And it came to me that one of my friends, who is now, she's older than me, she's 72, she's alone. And she tells the trauma from the women's side of what that means being a second generation, being used by the Israeli army and all the generals and the huge dreams. She was the lover of one of the big officers in the Israeli army. Then she was left alone. Then she was the lover of the boss she worked with. And she is telling the story of the women's side from the 50s till 22. And she is a kind of a twin soul of Eagle. But Eagle was a more well-known story, more active, more open. He shouted in the streets. He sent emails and WhatsApps and fax and letters. But she was silent. And I found her when I came to visit my childhood home, standing at the window, watching. She recognized me and she said, "Lizzie, can you tell my story? I have no one to tell the story, but I'm a story of a generation. I'm a story of modern life in the world and in Israel. And I want to share my story." And I came to visit her. She is alone, no one, no family, no friends, nothing but memories. And while I wrote, I always take testimonies, stories, memories, and I just mix them in order to be more literarish in a way. I put my imagination, I change a bit because it's not a document. And then she called me and she said, "You know, after talking with you, I'm not strong as you. All my demons came back, and I want you to erase this book, not to publish it. But please take the idea of telling the story of the women, the post-traumatic women in Israel." And that's what I did. And I'm almost at the end of this book. And this will be the spiritual partner of Eagle. And the title of the book will be changed, but she asked me to give the title To Whom It May Concern, because she felt that nobody was ready to listen to her.
That's true. Often we underreport the side of the women, the experiences of women, because history is both sides, his story and her story.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I look forward to that. Hopefully, I don't know if I'll be able to read that book. I don't know. Hopefully, I'll be able to.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. Yeah, I can sit and tell the whole story.
That would be exciting. Yes, we can do a part 2 where you tell us the story.
All right.
Yes.
With pleasure.
Thank you. Lizzie, thank you. What an honor. What an honor. Thank you so much for your time.
For me, I'm so happy. It was like a therapy. I could talk about everything.
Thank you. And I'm sure that our audience really, really enjoyed the conversation, and it was very thought-provoking. Thank you very much for that. What an honor.
Thank you for listening and being with us, and thank you for wonderful moderation. It was really a pleasure. I like to write, but I like to talk as well.
Thank you. Then we should definitely think about a part 2 of this.
With pleasure, I'll be with you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. It's the same time. Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, and bye-bye. And
bye-bye.
Auf Wiedersehen, we say in German, my second mother tongue. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lizzie. Thank you. And bye, everyone. Thank you. Everyone, please join us again on next Thursday, for our Kristallnacht commemoration webinar event. So our annual Kristallnacht commemoration will be next Thursday, same time.
You have heavy topics.
Yes, we have a very, very heavy topic. But yeah, so thank you very much. So hopefully we'll see you then. And good evening. Yeah. Thank you. Good evening and goodbye.
Bye-bye. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.